Welcome to Inspiring Heartfelt Conversations presented by In Autumn's Cocoon. My name is Barbara Morningstar. In this series, we explore a range of end-of-life topics with noted professionals in the field. Today, it is my absolute honor to have as my guest, Dr. Balfour Mount. He is considered the father of palliative care in North America, was inducted into the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame in 2018, and is the Eric M. Flanders Emeritus Professor of Palliative Care at McGill University in Montreal. He is also the founder of the McGill Programs in Integrated Whole Person Care and founder of McGill's International Congress on Palliative Care, an officer of the Order of Canada, an officer of the Order of Quebec, and recipient of the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine Lifetime Achievement Award. His autobiography, 10,000 Crossroads, The Path as I Remember It, was released earlier this year. Welcome. So special to have you here.
Special to be here, Barbara. Thank you.
So I want to dive right in and start at the beginning of your medical career. What was your initial specialty in medicine?
Barbara, I was a surgeon, a surgical oncologist. My thing was surgery of the urinary system. And that's what I was doing at McGill. I was fully engaged surgeon when this got started.
So I'm always fascinated by turning points or crossroads, as you so beautifully highlight in your book, in people's lives. What influence did Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and Dame Cicely Saunders have on the direction of your life?
Oh, a very complete impact. I went to a lecture at McGill by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whom I must say I'd never heard of at that point. And I was stunned by her ability as a speaker, first of all. But then I was impressed by her focus on the whole person and her tremendous capacity to be fully aware of the whole person. She's a remarkable woman, and we later became friends, and I reaped to some degree the benefit of her sharp eye, and helped me clean up my game a little bit. Cicely, I partially through Elizabeth's lecture, but really my subsequent reading, I became aware of Dame Cicely Saunders and St. Christopher's Hospice in London, England. So I took a trip over to take a look at it, because the St. Christopher's Hospice was really the first internationally credible center for care of the terminally ill, focusing on research and teaching as well as on the folks that they were taking care of. And I was very impressed by what they were doing, the quality of their work, and the scope of their focus on the whole person, so to speak. So Cicely became a friend as well, and then it all went from there. what struck me was that given the impact of St. Christopher's and given the insight behind that lay behind their approach, seemed to me that there needed to be an academic center doing the same thing. That isn't to say that Sicily and St. Christopher's wasn't an academic center. It certainly was. But I meant one anchored in and situated in a faculty of medicine. So we started a program at the Royal Victoria Hospital here at McGill, and that became the first such model being tried and being attempted in an academic center, in a faculty of medicine, in other words.
Mm-hmm. Why the term palliative care instead of hospice?
Barbara, the term hospice had been used by Dame Cicely at St. Christopher's, and in fact, internationally, for centers caring for the dying. Hospice had been used. What we were doing in a faculty of medicine, McGill University, was, in a sense, because it was faculty of medicine based and academic, with academic aims as a fundamental addition to the whole person care. It seemed to me that it needed a new term, and to palliate means to alleviate. And so it was, in my view, palliative care we were giving. So I used that term, and it was the first time it had been used because it was just a new experiment.
So you've met so many influential people along this journey, and you had the opportunity to meet Viktor Frankl. Not everyone knows who he is. He actually was the author of Man's Search for Meaning, which he wrote after being in a concentration camp in the Second World War. So what influence did his work have on your life?
Well, it had a very special place because I invited him. I was tremendously impressed by his personal history and the terrible experiences he went through thanks to the Nazi concentration camps. But I was also so impressed by Man's Search for Meaning, and so invited him to McGill for a conference. And as a sidebar, I was speaking at this conference, and then he followed with the main address. And at the end of the morning, he said, here something here are my notes. They may be of some interest. And of course, I was tremendously interested. This was Viktor Frankl. And he said, here, I'd like you to have this as well. And he's quite a remarkable caricaturist or cartoonist or artist. He'd done two pictures. One was a picture of me while I was lecturing, and the second one was a picture of himself as he lectured. And they're very cleverly done and quite wonderful. They're right in front of me up on the wall here in my office as I speak. I was profoundly impressed by all he'd been through and humbled. But I was also impressed by the insights of this remarkable man, and the insights that really tie in nicely to the concept of whole person care, and how complex we are. Complex in a sense, but also what a rich opportunity each of us has for having more profound, holistic experience of each of the moments we have the privilege of living through.
So you mentioned whole person care there, and this is a big component of the programs. Can you explain to the audience what you mean by whole person care?
As a surgeon, I found myself focusing on the pathophysiology of disease, on the characteristics of and pathology of illness. And as a surgeon, that was what I should be focused on. The pathophysiology, the presence of the disease process. And that's what healthcare is largely focused on, and so it should be. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, as they say, we're physical, psychological, social, and spiritual. The disease process is happening in the individual who experiences it and experiences his or her response to the pathology, to the experience, in all of those domains. So it occurred to me that, and I was struck by, at St. Christopher's, what was evident was that they focused on the physical, the psychological, the social, and the existential experience that the patient, the person, was having. I say existential rather than spiritual. It's the same thing. Regarding that domain, the problem with the word spiritual for many people who don't consider themselves to have recognized the spiritual domain that is theirs, it just enables them to see that it's an existential experience that they're having. Doesn't mean they believe in this or that, but and if you believe in this and I believe in that, we don't necessarily have a problem. We have an existential domain, a dimension of seeing my reality or your reality, that aspect of our reality, and recognizing. So I guess what we're saying is that healthcare in most centers focuses on the disease. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, it's the whole person that is involved.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's beautiful. to see the whole dimension of the person in front of you. And just like you said, instead of the pathology of a title or a diagnosis, it's quite profound. But you take it even deeper and have reflected on healing connections, done research on this, and you use the term healing connections. Can you explain what you mean about the importance of healing connections?
Well, it seems to me that to go back to the observation that healthcare usually focuses on the pathophysiology of the disease, focuses on the disease process, rather than the whole person experience of each moment. Now I forget how you'd worded the question.
So it's about healing connections and celebrating the importance of healing connections.
We, as a surgeon, I was focused on the pathophysiology of disease, the disease process. But that person in front of me is experiencing it as a whole person in those 4 different domains to try and understand it, probably inaccurately and too simplified. But we each experience disease and each moment. This moment of talking to each other in a fairly simplistic way, when it has to do with not just chatting as we're doing now, but it has to do with the fact that I have a disease process and you're my doctor, and it's focused on the pathophysiology of the disease. But there's so much more that is slipping past about this moment that would add richness and depth to our understanding of the process of the incident of the moment for each of us. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm your surgeon and you're on the OR table, you want me to be focused on the pathophysiology of disease, and that's where I want to be. But one of the reasons we're having this conversation is that we're trying to broaden the context, broaden the picture, see a wider horizon that includes meaning for both of us. And that is a dimension that holds rich potential for the patient if the caregiver is aware of it. And it turns out, as Dame Cicely showed, it turns out there's so much more we can do for the dying person. It isn't just a matter of that the disease won and that we've lost, the patient has lost that game. The fact is that we're much broader and richer and deeper than that. And there's so much more at a deeper level that we can perhaps accomplish to everyone's benefit.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. So in healing connections, do you mean the family and friends, or connection to, like, how does that supportive connectedness help the person in the journey at end of life or in life in general?
If the caregiver going to the bedside or coming in contact, sitting down at the chair that's beside the bed and asking, well, how's it going today? How does it feel for you today? If I sit down in that chair by the bed and project a dimension of presence, it opens a window. It could open, may open, not necessarily, but it often opens a window for the person I'm speaking to and listening to explore their own experience of this illness and in a deeper, more wholesome way. And so that it invites a different kind of connection. And that's where what I think of in healing connections, because it isn't, if I can, wouldn't it be nice if I could serve as an agent in healing disease, making it go away? But if I can't, perhaps there are other dimensions that I can be relevant to in a helpful way.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. I debated whether I would share this or not. It's very personal, but I have a deep respect for this on a personal. I haven't shared this publicly, but when I was 15, I was diagnosed with a digestive illness. And I could not take the medications. I'm so sensitive. I would land in the hospital all the time because of this. I could steroids, 103 temperature, and then would try to go into diet. And then I lost a friend to a really tragic suicide. And that combination forced me at a very young age to say, I can't take the medication. I've got this diagnosis, but it's not healing. What do I do? And at a young age, started to go deeper into the spiritual, the intellectual, the psychosocial parts, and just dove into that and have never, and it healed over time. And I don't take medications, and it's enriched me, and it's been a marker for me to explore my life. So I have, I haven't shared that because it's deeply personal. But it's also another reason I honor what you do here, because it is beyond just a physical expression of illness. There's layers in healing that are rich in tapestry, hard to go into at times, but you celebrate that profoundly with those in illness and end of life. So I honor you for that. It's rich and profound, and I wish it would ripple out into other domains of medicine, so. Well,
and it's, of course, it's exciting, isn't it? Because it means that when the doorbell rings and it's the man working on the front yard trying to get our domain livable, that when I answer that doorbell and listen to his observation, he really, whether he realizes it or not, he also is bringing those four domains to, and how I respond is conditioned by those four domains as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So moving to a little bit of a different, behind you, I see all this gorgeous artwork. And I saw another interview with you, and it weaves into this too, I think, what we're talking about. You're a wonderful artist. And I saw your, a little bit of your portfolio in a different interview. So how has art and the influence of art had an effect on your life and your work?
Drawing and painting and sketching and those kinds of things have been for me, a rich hobby since early childhood. So there's that dimension. But when I think of the arts, I think of drawing and painting, but I also think of the music. I also think of poetry and the other art forms, writing. So I think life is just so rich with the arts. And often, we miss the opportunity from go deeper because we just see it as from a superficial point of view. I'll give you an example that means a lot to me. The Canadian photographer Joseph Karsh published his book Portraits of Greatness, and then a second edition was Karsh Portraits. One of the ones that is in that collection that means a tremendous amount to me was his portrait of Marian Anderson, the American contralto Marian Anderson. And if you look at that, you realize you're seeing her at depth. The story behind the photograph is interesting and very relevant to this conversation. He went to her home to photograph her, and she's a very compliant, eager to please individual. And he looked at the various photographs he was getting and wasn't pleased with them at all. Her pianist, Franz Rupp, came in for a practice session with her during this photographic appointment. And Karsh, and it's what makes Karsh great, Karsh realized he was missing it, realized his time was up. And while Marian Anderson was sidetracked for a moment, Karsh went over to Franz Rupp and said, "Will you play just in the background, just as if you're just doing it for yourself, the piece Crucifixion?" Marian Anderson's a person of tremendous depth, spiritual depth. And the look that came over her face when Franz Rupp started quietly playing that, Karsh clicked the camera. And that's the photograph that's in the collection. And what you see as you look at that photograph, Karsh photograph of her, is not reflects that. It's a 1 in a million photograph. It reflects that depth and reflects Karsh's genius. But what it's really reflecting, of course, is the depth and sensitivity and the spiritual depth of Marian Anderson.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Art at its highest, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
She sings pretty good too.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, I want to shift now to a little bit more of a tender conversation around your own health. What has, and I thank you for being willing to go into this reflection together. What has the experience of being a patient been like for you?
Well, it's been a doorway to great Thanksgiving, not Thanksgiving for illness, but Thanksgiving and making it through the trials of 3 different cancers over my lifetime. The first one was as a young adult, and then the second one, then the third. These are different cancers. And so I am deeply privileged, and I recognize that, to have made it this far. I'm 120 years old now. And
beautiful, I want to say.
And you asked what the experience of illness has meant to me. Well, I think in terms of what we've been speaking about, it certainly has opened me up to thinking about and experiencing the potential, well, the definite, ever-present transience of life, but also it has helped me see the importance of each moment, the need to be present to the lived moment, because there's so much there, and that I invariably miss unless I come back to the present moment. And then it's like a light going on. It means so much more, that moment, than I might have given it credit for.
I also have seen you speak. I know when you spoke about drawing people's faces, because that's one of your talents, the intimacy in the drawing and capturing that person, but also in the conversations flowing over into the profound intimacy of being with people at end of life. I know I've experienced that in my hospice work and when my husband was dying. It's hard to explain to people. I keep bringing it up but you eloquently talk about that. Can you speak to the intimacy of this, the uniqueness of it, the beauty of it, this time?
I think we tend to, as we try to go deeper, we tend to make it more complex than it needs to be. I think Karsh's photograph of Marian Anderson captured a microsecond where Karsh had seen in her face her depth the depth of her lived moment. And got it. And it's priceless, that photograph. So to me, what that signifies is that is a half an hour or longer appointment with her in her home. She was doing her very best to be herself and to look like Marian Anderson. It wasn't until he captured her when she was really other than and knew it, and that he came up with this remarkable photograph. I guess what I'm saying is when we have a malignancy, when we have any illness, when we have fractured relationship with a loved one, when we, whatever it is we're experiencing, there's the possibility of meeting it, asking the question, as we sink under the water for the third time, asking the question, what can I take from this that is helpful to my journey through life? That's not to romanticize life or to, it's to say that though I miss it most of the time, the deeper meanings to this, to that we've been trying to get our minds around, they're there, and they can be healing experiences for us. Well, what do I mean by that? Jesus, I'm going to die within the coming few weeks. What's healing about that? Well, by healing, I mean there's a dimension in the lived experience that may bring me solace, may bring me a dimension of understanding, may help me to see that I'm accompanied in a way that I had no idea I was being accompanied. That kind of thing.
It's beautiful. So what advice then would you give physicians or other frontline workers when they come around someone in the vulnerable place at end of life to the bedside? What advice would you give them based on this viewpoint or experience?
I think what we can try to bring to the bedside or to the casual meeting of the guy working on the front lawn right now, what we can bring to interactions is what we can recognize is the need for me to slow down, for God's sake. Come into this moment. Who is that person? Who is that person in bed? And it doesn't need to take a long time. It's a matter of us just being there. What do you mean? And that's what we're trying to get at with healing connection. Be present in a way, even if it's just to realize that guy working on the front lawn right now, or that lady in bed with a serious illness, and that I'm having the privilege of chatting with for a minute. They are each having their lived moment has depth as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean we're so busy. It doesn't mean that this is going to take a lot of time. It just means be present.
Mm-hmm.
Be present in that way. And it may signify it simply by a deep breath. Well, how's it going today? I hear from the nurses you had a rough night last night. Or the guy in the front lawn who I didn't perhaps meet up to my expectation. I could have said to him, how's it going? What about the roots of that tree? It's enormous, for crying out loud. Has it been a problem? I don't understand that. Tell me about that.
Mm.
It's the possibilities that you and I and all of us have to just tap into or recognize the potential, the limitless potential of each lived moment.
Mm. Well, sometimes in my presentations to nurses or doctors or even hospice workers, I hear them say, I don't have enough time to do this. And I love that you say it, because I share with them this moment with my husband when we ended up in the ER and he needed a blood transfusion for the first time. And he was so afraid. And this beautiful young, I can still see him, like this is like close to 13 years ago plus. This beautiful young Asian doctor comes walking up with his clipboard. And I don't know what he did in his practice, but he was only there 10 minutes to take in his name and details. The grace of him. And I just watched as he totally focused on my husband. He saw him. He held that clipboard. He held space for him. And I just watched my husband just completely relax. And I just looked at this. I was falling in love with him, just the way he was holding the moment. I just wanted to kiss this guy. And he did the intake. He honored him to a depth that could be felt in the air. And when he was done, he went off and I could just feel the difference in my husband. And I watched him in the ER and he held that space in the same way. It didn't matter if the person was off the street or erratic, he just held it. And I still remember him. So he is a beautiful example of what you're speaking about, right?
A wonderful example. Wonderful. And here it is these years later, and it's as clear to you as you described it. I could see that he was right with you. Even now.
You could feel the beauty of this soul's heart, this man's heart, right? And it rippled out into the calming, and it was brief. Lovely.
Yeah.
So we're going to move. There's so much here. It's so lovely to share with you. I want to shift into a little bit of a different dialogue. There's a lot of research coming out now about the importance of acknowledging deathbed visions and dreams. And when you were creating the template for the Royal Victoria Palliative Care Unit, the National Film Board came on board of Canada, National Film Board of Canada, and they did a wonderful documentary titled The Last Days of Living. And I phoned them and I had the privilege of viewing it. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
But there's one moment in the documentary which happened to be captured in the filming where a patient wakes up and she's had a vision of her own death. And yet it's positive for her. And the staff takes that very seriously. And sure enough, she dies a few days later. But, this is back in the 70s, in the foundation of the template of this. What made you and your team acknowledge so deeply the significance of these deathbed visions and dreams from the beginning?
my interest in drawing and pet sketching and painting and stuff like that moves on or includes film. And the great films, my list of great films would be different than yours or anybody's. We're all different. Because I think what we're picking up in a particular film is those various dimensions of presence that we were talking about earlier. So I went to the National Film Board. I'm sort of a big fan of their work, and told them I thought there were some things they might know about. Actually, there was an international group in Scandinavian country that wanted to make a film of what we were doing. And they approached us through the National Film Board because they thought if I got a filmmaker from Sweden contacting us, it's not, the contact isn't going to work. So the National Film Board contacted us, and when they had an idea of what was happening, they entered the game, and we had to choose between the two of them. And the NFB, it wasn't much of a contest. At any rate, that is how the film happened. But the sequence you refer to has to do with that special capacity that happens from time to time where our own death may be experienced, and I'm wording it very something quite filled with awe or sensitivity or wonder or something, but it's trying to put into words an experience that would seem to us to be frightening, but it isn't. And it isn't frightening. And in the specific instance in the film, as I recall, it's 1,000 years ago we did it, that happened. But those near-death experiences can be very reassuring. And it was precious that got included in the Film Board film, The Last Days of Living.
Well, it was so beautiful to see how the staff took it seriously and then even brought her husband in, who hadn't been there in a while, to visit. And it was timely because she died just days later, and the dream was alerting them to that, and it invited them to do even deeper care and connection from that.
That takes us back to the term or the idea of healing connections. And the exciting part of that little phrase is the recognition that, my goodness, we each have the potential of sowing, of putting out there a healing dimension to that transient connection that I'm having with the guy working on the front lawn. It's hard to talk about these things because it sounds so phony and or idealized. And in a sense, it is idealized because the ideal is to look at the potential that was buried in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm distracted during our conversation by the picture of Audrey Hepburn behind.
I love her.
It's Audrey Hepburn, and it was, I can't remember the film, but it was clear to me that she was radically present. At least that's what I took from that moment that's portrayed in that picture. So we all, although it sounds pretty idealized and well idealized, but it's always there for us. Mm-hmm. It's there to tap into that nurse who went to the bedside of the person. She only has a couple of seconds, but if she sits down and she says, well, just makes it obvious that she's really there for this second or two. Mm-hmm. Makes such a difference.
Well, it's funny that you bring up Audrey Hepburn, because my father years ago gave me a book as a gift, Audrey Hepburn, An Elegant Spirit, which was written by her son. Really? And oh yes. And I know he was always encouraging. He gave me a book in my early 20s by a woman, Dame Naomi James, who'd sailed around the world through Cape Horn for the first time, and encouraged me to never let anyone stop me from embracing whatever I wanted to do, male or female, just in life. But then he gave me the gift of the book of Audrey Hepburn, and it was his way. My father had such a respect for the feminine.
Audrey, it was an elegant spirit.
An elegant spirit. And he gave me the book, and it was so beautiful because it was his way of saying, don't ever lose. My father died last year. Don't ever lose the grace and beauty of the feminine heart and elegance. And those moments have that beauty wrapped in them, right? It's very, very rich and deep and precious. So it's interesting you're bringing her up as a presence too.
And what a privilege that your dad has just entered into the conversation.
Yes.
Lovely.
Beautiful influence, my dad. Well, in the documentary, you had the presence and respect of volunteers, of the musicians, of the counselors, of the nurses and doctors, but kind of invited in more of an equal way.
Well, the other thing is, just to pause for a second at the thought of being present to the moment. The nurse you were speaking about that comes to life in the book and in the film, it just happens to be, her name is Dolores Nickerson. And she's a good example. She worked on the team both as a nurse, and there were reasons for this, but also as a volunteer. Mm-hmm. Now, what was different about our team was that we were trying to be aware of, and as poorly as we can do it, an attempt to address or being aware of the physical, psychological, social, existential domain. Well, it sounds good. How the hell do you do that?
Right.
Well, we thought it was important to have a team that looked quite different from the usual Royal Vic team. There were doctors and nurses. But there were also on the whole team, social workers. There also was, someone deeply concerned about spiritual issues of one kind or another. So we had and there were volunteers. The volunteers were not your average. They were trained up. They had a volunteer training course that we built up so that they were highly trained professionals as who happened to be in their real life or in their day-to-day life, volunteers. So we had a rich volunteer team. And in most programs in hospitals, the volunteers are just whoever happens to say, I have an hour or two available.
Right.
These weren't, that doesn't define our volunteers. Our volunteers have been through a volunteer training program that was exquisite in its depth and sometimes problematic in its depth. When one of these volunteers comes up with an observation that goes right over the heads of the other people on the team. But the issue that you raise just reminds me of the multifaceted kind of team that we had and still is there. The goal is to have people who are alert to these various dimensions.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So let's just move into some final sort of reflective questions for you. How has this work affected your own personal exploration of the transcendent?
Well, let me just, in thinking about that, let me say one of the things of the many things I do badly in life, one of the things is meditating. I'm a meditator. The friend I have who I meditate with on a regular basis is a businessman. He's Jewish by birth and family, but through a long story, his spiritual domain is Hindu. Now that's sort of unexpected. But so here's a would-be Christian healthcare worker, but really, who knows closer to what, meditating with a Hindu Jewish businessman. To me, the example means a lot because it's me. But my point is that our need is to be present, to learn to be present, just that. And one of the things, Barbara, that's obvious to me as I have this privilege of having a chat with you, is the problem I'm having with my memory. I'm of an age now where I'm 82, and my memory isn't so good either. My memory leads to the fact that my reflections on your question are in each case tripped up by trouble remembering the wording of the question or the issue. So I'm a living example of the aging process, and coming back to the relevance of that personal observation, not only I would hope that it sheds light on my often unrelated responses that I give. But for me, it's a reminder of what we've been talking about. It's a lived experience I'm having of as the kids used to say, losing it. I'm losing it. And boy, at a pretty rapid rate. Well, that's the way it is. What can I do with it? I guess that's what I...
The beauty of it, though, Bal, is that you keep bringing it back to the present moment. Like every week brings it back to the essence of the present moment. And that's a profound reminder in itself, you know?
I think that's always a challenge to do that, but it's in this present moment where I'll find meaning. It's not my fantasies for the future that hold that meaning. Well, and neither is it the continuing focus on the past, but that's where we like to be, or where we automatically go. It's in the present moment that I'll find what's the real potential of this moment for Barbara and Bal.
My mother had Alzheimer's for over 12 years, and you know, it invites you to be in that moment fully with her, because there is no past or future. It's just the engagement there and the celebration. And even if the language would change and become more metaphoric, instead of trying to follow it literally, we would just honor the movement of it and celebrate and connect through our hearts with her. You know, it was actually quite rich. My father was wonderful with her, with music and you know, other ways we touched her. And so it's a different invitation to engage as the body and memory change too into the moment as well.
Sure.
So beauty, I'm going to ask you this in a few final questions. Has your perspective of beauty changed over the years?
I hope so. And I put it that way because beauty is appreciated in the present moment. And and the more I can respond to the beautiful part and not the challenging, not that we don't have to respond to the challenging part, we do. But somewhere in there, if I can just let go of all this garbage and come into the present moment, I'm likely to find a rich reward that I hadn't expected. And I think we talked about Man's Search for Meaning. He was in Auschwitz or Dachau or wherever in the world he was, which one of the concentration camps. But even there, Viktor Frankl was able to find a moment of meaning or a moment of richness or a potential. He talks about it. He got talking to the other prisoners. And I find that very wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So if you could share one life lesson, no pressure, that you would want to say to people, what would be one major life lesson that you would want to share or highlight or have people take away with?
I would try and get them to teach me or to look in their own lives for what it is about my present circumstances that has richness, opportunity, little bits of gold in amongst the unpleasant stuff that may be there. Because there is that aspect to the present moment. But it's my job to slow down enough to recognize it, and see it, and appreciate it, and celebrate it. It's the little gremlin sitting on my other shoulder says, "Celebrate it, you dork." You not realize that you can't remember what your middle name is just now. Well, first of all, I'd say, "Oh, yes, I can." But the other thing is, my response to that is, well, just give it a try. Maybe I'll be surprised by the potential that's hidden away in this very moment.
Lovely. So if you could share with people, because your foundational work was to create the template and the gift of the service of palliative care, what do you think the greatest gift of palliative care is for individuals?
I think the greatest gift for patient, family members, and caregivers is the recognition that if we go to the presence of healing connections, if we open ourselves, if we just are present to one another for in these difficult moments, we may be surprised at what's there.
And so my last signature question to all my guests is, how has your heart been changed by this work?
Well, to the degree that it has been changed, I think I'm thankful for just what we've been talking about, the potential hidden and too often missed by me, but the potential that's hidden in the present moment, when I let go of all of the other things, aspects, so my thought was to for us to slow down enough, be present enough. It has to do with presence. It has to do with healing connections. It has to do with those aspects. And in there, I'm likely to find grace.
That's beautiful. I do remember a moment in Victor, I've read Man's Search for Meaning, where he's at one of the lowest points and he feels the presence of his wife. He doesn't know if she's dead or alive, and he has an epiphany about love. And that just brought me to tears when I read that. It was quite profound. In that moment of grace, it opened to his heart to the depth of love. And I know for me, there's a witnessing and experience of that in the intimacy of this work. And in the times I've been with people authentically at end of life, I've loved that I've been transformed by the love and the connection on that depth.
It's funny, I don't know how this will work, but Barbara, I've been distracted all the way through by the bottoms, the bottom ends of several of the illustrations that I've done over the years. Let me see if I...
Okay.
The one right over my head was an illustration of the crucifixion, and the others had some relevance too. But the thing that was coming to my mind was when I realized what the upper half of that illustration was that it isn't just a response to all of the positive moments of life. It's a response that counts. It's a response to the whole ball of wax. And and the other thing, this aspect of mine, of the work I've been privileged, the team I've been privileged to join and be part of, has to do with working with and being with and struggling through really difficult times. My clients are dying. Well, we all are, but they're dying right away. And but as I look back, paradoxically, my memories are almost always positive, and of the grace that's there. If Jack or Jill has a little help with the control of the pain or the memory of divorce or with a little help, the grace that's there as well is staggering.
Beautiful. Well, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me in conversation today. I read the full book. Full book, 10,000 Crossroads, which I really want people to embrace. But I have to tell you, I think I emailed you this when I was reading it. I didn't expect the emotion to come up that did, and I had to keep putting it down and going for a walk in nature, going for a drive, because as you say, it's whole person. It's the beautiful and it's the challenging moments. And as I was reading it, so many were coming up for me in the work in hospice, but also when my husband was dying. It wasn't an easy journey, but the gratitude, Val, the gratitude for the depth. It's you and Cicely and Elizabeth and the intent. People do not understand the depth of this gift we have. I've met doctors who've worked in countries who do not have palliative care, and they've come here and they've watched people suffer with no means to help them. And they've said to me, do you understand the gift that you have? So the gratitude was overwhelming as I read the book. And so I just, from the depth of my heart, and you're a humble man, but I want you to receive this, for your contribution to medicine in service to humanity. It's so beautiful. And I have been the recipient, not only in witnessing in my work, but in being around loved ones who've received the gift of palliative care. So I can't thank you enough. And of course, I'm Canadian. So I also get to celebrate this important part of Canadian history. And so as a Canadian, it's also pretty special to be able to sit down and honor you this way too. So I thank you deeply for this and appreciate all that you've done.
I receive those kind words, recognizing that they're really directed into the fulsome input of a remarkable team effort.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, brother.
Okay.